I want to give a very quick presentation based on this book that I wrote a couple of years ago, really trying to figure out what the key drivers were of culture. Because culture is such an amorphous word, right? If all of us stood in front of a whiteboard and say, what is culture? We could put 100 things on the board and they would all be right. So I tried to figure out, well, let's try and make this a little more specific. So just to begin at the beginning, the idea for this book really started with this sentence that I heard during one of my interviews. We aspire to be the largest small company in our space. Obviously, largest in terms of revenues, smallest in terms of culture, just holding on to that startup feel. Once I heard that, I started hearing this theme coming up elsewhere. This is one of the first things that Larry Page said when he took over as CEO of Google. It's really interesting. Keep the nimbleness and soul and passion and speed of a startup, even as you're growing quickly. So that just got me thinking, well, how do you do that? And then I tried to refine the question a little bit more, which is, what are the biggest drivers of culture? Then I tried to refine that even more and came up with this, which is, what are the things that, if done well, have an outsized positive impact? And if done badly or not at all, have an outsized negative impact? And I think the best books always start with a really good dumb question, right? Just a really tightly focused question. So once I had this question, then I went back through literally hundreds of my corner office interviews looking for themes and answers that spoke to this question. For me, it's just a pattern matching exercise. I just sort of taking all these insights. I didn't start with a theory of what the answer was, but just so that the material would grow organically out of all the interviews. And it took me a few rounds. I had too many categories and then too few, and I finally got it right. It's not like I've cracked some magic code. I'm a journalist. I do pattern matching and dot connecting. You guys might find some different answers, but these is what I found. So the first half of the book is what I call setting the foundation, and I think these are the things that literally every company has to have. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. But these, to me, were the universal things that were both specific but general enough that they could apply to anybody. And there's 6 of them, so let me just run through them quickly. So the first one is what I call a simple plan, which I know it sounds simple, but simple is hard, as you know, right? Because I really think it's a leader's job to be able to stand up in front of their staff and answer the kind of question that little kids ask, right? Which is, where are we going and how are we going to get there? And I think the thing that you really need to have is some scoreboard, some objective scoreboard to determine whether you're winning or not. So that it's not just in your head, but everybody can see it. And so that you all know if you're making progress or not. And it's got to be simple, right? You've got to just have a few things. You got to make them super transparent so that everybody understands how the work they're doing contributes to that goal. That's what teamwork is all about, right? You have an offense and a defense, you have a ball boy, water boy, whatever. Everybody says, I'm contributing to the scoreboard. That's why that scoreboard is so important. This insight to me, I fell out of my chair. I just thought this was so brilliant. If you don't give people metrics, if you don't give them that scoreboard, smart people will make up their own. Right? And that's why it's so hard to have tough conversations with employees if they're not performing well and there's no objective scoreboard. Because without that, they're keeping their scoreboard in their own head. And guess what? They are killing it on their own scoreboard in their own head. Right? It's just touchdowns all day long. All they do is say no all day and blocking things. But in their mind, they're like protecting the brand or something. So that's why you have to have that objective scoreboard. The other thing is that scoreboard guards against silos. And it really is silos that ultimately destroy a company, right? Just that sense of, even though we're on the same team, you get people with this sort of, well, this is our department, that's them. You get a little bit of a Game of Thrones vibe within your own company, and that's always dangerous. So once you have that simple plan, you have to repeat it relentlessly. Truly believe in this saying, I've heard this as a key lesson from literally dozens of CEOs that I've interviewed, that even though you have the message, even though you said it last week, you have to say it again. And you have to say it in different ways, but just keep repeating it. And why is that? This is the best answer. Never give people a void because they'll think something is awry. Right? I think people sometimes wonder, it's like, why do I need to say it again? This is the answer, because if you don't say it, you're going to create a void and people fill it with junk. Right? They fill it with rumors and politics, and they pick up on little signals that may have nothing to do with anything. So that's why you have to over-communicate. The second thing is what I call rules of the road, which is really about values. And of course, we know why they're important, right? I like this metaphor from Sharon, sort of sense of DNA that you share. Also, Bob Johnson said it's sort of like a religion. Tolerate a little bit of heresy, but not a lot. I think that's a good insight. I always ask the CEOs I interview if they've codified their values. I often have moments in the interviews when I ask them, yes, we have, and I say, I'd love to hear what they are. There's usually a moment during the interview that sort of looks like this. And this usually happens if the CEO has, at their company, they have like 6 or more values. And I have to say, about 80% of the time or more, if they have 6 or more values, they can't remember them all. Right? And if the CEO can't remember all the values, how do they expect everybody else to? And I know it's hard. I think one of the things that people try to do with values is they want to take all possible human behavior, positive and negative, and somehow distill it down into a list. You don't have to do that. You just have to focus on a couple of 3 things that really make a difference. And once you do that, you have to live them every day. You have to use them in the hiring process, for firing, for regular awards. You just have to make it part of the fabric. Because if anybody spots a gap between your stated values and the way people behave and who gets promoted, cynicism sets in. And as Kathy told me, cynicism is like a cancer that will just go through your organization. So that's the second one. The third one is you have to treat people with respect, just basic human respect. If you want people to come into work with their best selves and not be in a kind of defensive crouch. We learned from the world of neuroscience that pretty much the worst thing that you can do to somebody is humiliate them in front of their peers. Pretty much the worst thing that you can do to somebody. A lot of the interviews that I've done with CEOs, when I ask them about early leadership lessons, they talk about a really bad boss they had when they were younger. They all use the same phrase. They talk about scar tissue. And they say, that moment I learned I would never treat anybody like that again. And what's interesting about that phrase, scar tissue, is it actually is scar tissue. As we learned from David Rock, if your boss disses you in front of a team, every time you remember that, you feel the pain again. It's different from physical pain. You forget physical pain after a while. But if you imagine those moments again, all those negative feelings will come back. And I apologize if I'm reminding you of some bad moments. So how do you make sure you treat people with respect? I like this expression at one company, MRI, which stands for most respectful interpretation, right? That's where you start. Somebody does something, you're sort of scratching your head like, why did they do that? Or not get it, or not get it done on time. You start with the most respectful interpretation. Because we tend to pathologize people, right? It's like, well, they're angry, they got passed over, they're pissed. We sort of come up with reasons why they didn't do something. But maybe they've got 3 bosses telling them to do, different things. So you just start with that most respectful interpretation. Good for our personal relationships as well, right? And what is the most important manifestation day to day of showing people respect? I think it's listening, truly listening. There's not a lot of listening that goes on in our society anymore, especially with our devices. And it is a challenge for all of you. It's a challenge for all of us who have 1,000 emails every day and we've got meetings. We can all kind of relate to Steve Ballmer, right? It's hard. You got so much, just trying to get through everything. Conductor is a search engine company, and I'm in touch with the CEO, Seth, there, and he just sent me this slide. I thought I'd share it with you. This is how he makes sure there's a culture of listening in the meetings, right? Because we're all stuck in those meetings, right? Everybody's got their computer open, their phones. It's like, is anybody listening here? So just kind of set these ground rules. So you got to show people respect, but it's a two-way street, right? You've got to hold them accountable. So it's about the team. This comes up a lot in my interview. If you really want a quick and nimble culture, you have to hold people accountable. Steve Stout, this is what he tells everybody. This is just one of the basic values of his company. It's pretty simple, right? Don't say you're going to do something and not do it. Right? Because how often have we worked with people where you say, you know, when am I going to get that? I'll get it to you by Thursday. And then you say to yourself, no, you're not. Right? And then Thursday comes around and say, remember that thing? You go, oh, yeah, I'll get it to you Monday. You say to yourself, no, you're not. Right? That just sort of slows down. Everybody needs to speed up. Can you imagine where literally everybody at your company did everything they said they were going to do? Again, this comes up a lot in my interviews. I love this expression, do to say ratio. What percentage of the things that you say you're going to do you actually do? You can put everybody you work with on that spectrum, right? What percentage? Mark Taro types this into every email so often it sort of auto-corrects and auto-fills. This stands for who will do what by when. Every meeting, every email, he's baked it into the culture. Who will do what by when? Let's not just like finish a meeting and go off in our separate directions. Everybody's got to step up and say who will do what by when. I heard another company has developed this metaphor, the trust battery, which I think is just brilliant. Toby explains it here. So this is the metaphor. This is what they use to talk about the culture in the company. What Toby says to people when they're hired, he says, you've made it through our hiring screen. Your trust battery is charged at 50%. And everything you do from now on, every little interaction, big interaction, important stuff, the little stuff, every interaction, the battery is being either charged or discharged. And they use to discuss that in the performance review. And again, it sort of externalizes this dynamic. So you got to treat people with respect. You got to hold them accountable. That's the theory. But sometimes you got to have adult conversations with them. And let's face it, a lot of people go out of their way to avoid them, right? They're difficult. We can always find reasons to put off having those discussions. You don't know how people are going to react, right? You sort of worry that it's like stepping into a knife fight in a phone booth. So you find reasons to put them off. But you just can't do it, right? And usually if there's a disagreement, there's always something under it. It's never about the thing, right? It's always something under it. So you just have to find out what that is. You know, there have been books that have been written about how to have difficult conversations. I heard one expression that to me is like, you know, what I really try and keep in mind, we talk about with our kids if we have disagreements, and the phrase is don't go over the net, which means you don't say anything that makes assumptions about why somebody is acting the way they are, right? You just stay on your side of the net. You just talk about behavior. And sometimes it's a very simple phrasing thing that can be super important. So you don't say, you know, a lot of people say, coming in 20 minutes late, seems like you don't care, right? You've just jumped over the net and got into their head and say, well, it seems like you don't care. And the person's going to get their back up, justifiably so. With a very slight tweak, you say, been showing up 20 minutes late, makes me feel like you don't care. You're staying on your side of the net. They can't argue with that. So again, sometimes those little wording changes can make all the difference. And also just kind of setting an environment, because we know from neuroscience when you're having those difficult conversations, you know, the front of people's brains literally get flooded. They're not hearing a word. So you have to create an environment, signal to people. This is one of my favorite talk about culture hacks. Isn't that brilliant? Right? Everything's going to be fine. It's got a little airplane, sort of takes it out of the one-on-one. So smart. So the last one is a small thing, but it's kind of a big thing, which is the hazards of email. There's something about email. I don't know what it is. It's just like taps into this like bad part of our brain, right? This is the key phrase to me. Things get lost in translation. How often has this happened to you? You send somebody an email, it's like, sky is blue, ocean is deep, right? Something really simple. You get something back and you're looking at it and going like, what did you think I was saying? Right? And suddenly you're like rolling up your sleeves and cracking your knuckles. And it's like, oh yeah? You think I said that? You know? Oh yeah? It's like there's something, there's like an oh yeah neighborhood in our brain that email taps into. You know, we see this like the CC loops. Does this happen to your company? Like people start getting added to the CC loops? You know, pretty soon you've got this in your own company. In your own company. So email comes up a lot in my conversations with CEOs. So a few rules for emails that I've heard that I think are worth sharing. No arguing after 2 emails. I've heard this from many CEOs. Simple rule, I disagree with you, you disagree with me, no more emails. Pick up the phone, get on Skype, or do something radical like get up out of your chair and walk down the hall and actually talk to the person in person. No email when anything is at stake. I heard a great saying from our CEO at the Times, Mark Thompson, and his rule of thumb, he said, if there's ever a conversation that you would rather have in email, is precisely the conversation that you can't have in email. I think that's a good reminder. We all get so many emails, but Jeff Weiner of LinkedIn says, well, send fewer emails, especially if you're leaders of your companies, because every email you send gets, spun out into like people who weren't there for the meeting and please catch me up. So if you send fewer emails, you'll get fewer emails. One CEO I interviewed said he just tells everybody on his staff, he says, if you CC me on an email, I promise you I will not read it. I will not read it. Because like a lot of people CC the boss, right, for all the obvious reasons. You get CC'd, people want to show off, cover their posterior, throw somebody under the bus, right? There's all these sort of hidden agendas with CC. So if you just sort of like stop doing it, just talk to yourself. If you need something from me, email me, don't just CC me. I think this is a good, pick a face means be consistent in your email style. Right? It doesn't matter if you're sort of chatty, how was your weekend, all that, or if you're really terse in your email styles like text messaging. Just don't waver from it. Because if you're chatty and then you send a really short email with like 3 question marks at the end of it, you are going to give somebody a heart attack. And you may not realize this, but it's true. Like as higher you go up in the ranks, like your emails have this like amazing amplification. So you have to be really sensitive to that and just be super consistent so that people aren't surprised. Okay, just to finish up, quick thought experiment. First phone call, 1876. First email was sent in 1971. What if the first email was sent in 1876, and in 1971, somebody invented something called a phone call? Right? Can you imagine how people would react? See, this phone is amazing. It's so much better than email. It's like they're right there. All that stuff that was like confusing, and we were on the same page. It's like, it's literally like they're right there. I love this phone. But no. Email is a productivity tool, right? It's not. You literally chew up so much time with miscommunication over email. And the other thing about email that drives me nuts is that I think email does literally nothing to actually build culture, to build that connective tissue between people. And it's much more likely to destroy it. So as much as you can kind of wring out that email culture and follow some of those rules. So those are just some 6 observations, and really those are observations. All of you will have your own list, and that's what it's time to talk about at the Give and Get session. So as we said, it's your turn now.